Hello and welcome. You're watching Explosive Exclusive with me, Padmaja Joshi. The Prime Minister is in the final leg of his state visit to the United States, and while there it became clear that it is India's moment to shine, capitalizing on its cultural, capital and demographic dividend from leading a record practice of yoga by 180 plus countries to meeting a slew of business leaders to a state dinner this evening. The power of chemistry and commerce going hand in hand was amply clear. But the close relationship between American President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi was clear when he was hosted in a private dinner by the first couple. The dinner was preceded by an exchange of gifts, each one with the distinct stamp of India and its cultural wherewithal.
Special gestures, warm exchanges, smiles and hugs. India-US camaraderie was on full display as the Bidens hosted Prime Minister Modi for an intimate dinner at the White House. Modi gifted some meticulously picked rare items for the US President and his wife, and the gesture was reciprocated by the first citizen of the US and his wife. PM presented Biden a copy of the first edition of book, the 10 Principal Upanishads. A sandalwood box handcrafted by master craftsmen from Rajasthan was also gifted by the Prime Minister. The box contained 10 Danam or 10 donations, as is the Vedic ritual of celebrating a person's life who has witnessed 1,000 full moons. A silver idol of Lord Ganesha, a diya, a gold coin and a piece of cloth were inside the box, among other things. Prime Minister Modi also presented a 7.5 carat eco-friendly green diamond to the First Lady. The eco-diversified resources like solar and wind power were used to make the diamond. As the official gift, the President and the First Lady presented PM Modi with a handmade antique American book gallery from the early 20th century. Biden's also gifted Modi a vintage American camera and an archival facsimile print of George Eastman's patent of the first Kodak camera and a hardcover book of American wildlife photography. The exchange of gifts at the intimate dinner at White House sets the tone for formal engagements including bilaterals, signing of pacts and much more. Bureau Report, Times Now.
Well, already all eyes are on the White House, where we are going to have the official arrival ceremony followed by the bilateral talks, a state dinner. Malvika is reporting live from there. It's over to you, Malvika. That's where all the action is.
Yes, right. This is an invitation-only event where Prime Minister Modi will receive a ceremonial reception at the White House. We'll try to get some reaction from the audience live instead of recording. Let's try to get to there. Sorry. You are seeing that the crowds are cheering for Prime Minister Modi and the raining of the crowd. They seem to be undeterred as the ceremonial reception is going to start in another hour. We have these live shots coming in from the White House. You can see the White House right behind me right now. And then on the left and right in the South Lawns here at the White House, there is a large gathering of the Indian diaspora that has been invited for this event.
All right, the largest number of crews at the White House is the largest network of India, Times Network. We've also got Sushant Sinha joining us live, and you can see from the sheer number of people there, the Indian diaspora clearly has turned out in full force. There they are. These are the live pictures from the White House. You see them there with the Indian tricolor, with the flag of America. the symbol of the friendship between the two countries. It seems that there is, earlier when President Biden had met Prime Minister Modi, Malvika, he had said, I'm finding it very difficult given the number of requests I'm getting for the state dinner. And the crowd behind you pretty much shows he wasn't off the mark.
Repeat the question. I couldn't hear you. The noise and the excitement here.
I can imagine. There is music and there are the masses. President Biden said earlier that he's getting a huge number of requests for people, all of whom want to be a part of the state reception. Going by the number of people behind you, he wasn't lying.
Well, right, the South Lawn has limited capacity, so around 1.5 lakh people had expressed their interest according to sources within the White House, but only a handful of them were able to attend the ceremony here. There are around, this is just an estimate, but about 2,000 to 3,000 people here in the White House right now, which is unheard of for a ceremonial reception. Remember that in the past, only 2 other premiers, the French president and the South Korean president, have been hosted by the White House for a state reception. So it is a significant development in the US-India partnership as we go forward.
In fact, just give us an idea for those uninitiated, so many of us, we've never been to Washington, D.C. How large is this space? Put it in perspective for us vis-a-vis the White House. Where will the Prime Minister be hosted? Where are you standing? Where have the Indian diaspora collected to welcome him?
Okay, so let's just start from the White House. Right behind me right now, you see the White House. This is the White House building. This is the South Lawn where we are standing. On the left and the right, there is the Indian diaspora that has been placed. People are expected to arrive at the South Lawn about 2 hours in advance. Now, this event is going to start at 10 a.m. in the morning, Eastern time. That is the US Eastern time, the Washington, D.C. local time. But people have gathered here from 7 a.m. because that was the expectation. You can hear the chants of Modi, Modi right here from the diaspora. These are Modi fans who have come here all the way from different parts of the country. And in the evening today, the state dinner is also going to be hosted at the same location. This is a lush green garden, a lawn that is adjacent to the White House, and it is reserved for very special, intimate events that are hosted by the president himself.
Absolutely. The numbers, whether it be in May on his visit to Australia, when Prime Minister Albanese has said that we've never seen this kind of crowd for any leader, at least no Australian leader, to now the number of people who have turned up in Washington as well, Malvika. There is never any dearth of people who just turn out in full force to welcome the Prime Minister.
It seems that Prime Minister Modi has been able to develop a significant fanfare in foreign countries amongst the Indian diaspora. People think very highly of him. There is a positive opinion amongst most circles in the diaspora about him. And that is why you are seeing people, even in the US, which is a large country. This whole continent of North America is occupied by just 3 nations, and United Nations is the largest part. And there are 2.5 million Indians who live here. And there is a significant fanfare for Modi, and you have seen this over the past 9 years since Prime Minister Modi has been in power, that all the events that have been organized in the country, there has been a significant turnout at each event, whether it was in New York at the Madison Square Garden, or in Houston, or now that we're witnessing it here in Washington, D.C.
Malvika, stay with me. We will very quickly bring in, because we've got some of the biggest voices from America and India talking about this state visit. So far, 3 heads of state have been given this state visit. Why is it significant? Taking us through the intricacies and importance is White House historian Matthew Costello, who is joining us. Mr. Costello, thanks very much for speaking to Times Now. First of all, if you could just take us through the nuances of an official state visit. How significant is it in a bilateral relationship, and how is it different from a regular visit?
Sure. So typically with a state visit has more pomp and circumstance. Sometimes both can have a state dinner, but usually a state visit will also include state arrival ceremony. The visiting dignitary and the president will greet one another outside the White House. They'll give reciprocal speeches, they review troops, and they listen to the national anthems of both countries. And then they head inside for diplomatic talks. Sometimes, state visits can extend several days, whereas an official visit could be something that's a little bit shorter. A lot of it depends on the calendars of, obviously, the President of the United States and the visiting dignitary. And, one of the key elements of all this is a state dinner, or a dinner in honor of the visiting head of state or visiting head of government. And that is usually the event that probably attracts the most attention, because you'll see all kinds of people, either from the administration, but also supporters of the administration, celebrities. This is where you'll, and usually typically members from that particular community. So whoever you're honoring, American citizens who also have ties to that community and that nation, also represented at the state dinner. There's usually a musical performance, both musical, ballet, some kind of entertainment after dinner. And the guest of honor is usually staying at Blair House, just across the street from the White House. It's called the President's Guest House. It's been that way since 1942. And many visitors will go through there and they will stay there. And it also helps in terms of accessibility and security for the visiting head of state.
We already see the tempo going up even as we draw closer to 7:30 p.m., which is when the official welcome will happen. You know what makes it very, very unique is that he's the first Indian Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi, to have got the occasion not just once but twice to address a joint sitting of the US Congress. Why do you think that is?
I'm not particularly sure about the reasoning, but I do know that is, as you pointed out, there's several examples here of these are very prominent world leaders from different eras and different time periods. I do think it probably speaks to the importance of the relationship between the United States and India for many different reasons, for diplomatic reasons, for national security reasons, for economic reasons. And what we've seen over time with a variety of different state visits is we see these relationships evolve and change. And, somebody who maybe wasn't as close to an ally 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, we see a rise in their country and a rise of their presence on the international stage in terms of economics, in terms of geopolitics. And so I do think that that's probably a big part of this. And President Biden has made it known that he considers India to be a very close partner in many different ways. And so I think that's probably another indication of that relationship deepening over time.
And it was very, very apparent at that intimate dinner hosted by the President and the First Lady yesterday. Please stay with me, Mr. Costello. I'm requesting you to just bear with us for a second, because we really have to cut across to the South Lawns of the White House, where we've got our colleagues standing. We've got Sushant Sinha there. We've got Malvika Jain as well. Sushant, वहाँ पर लगता है कि जो फैन फॉलोइंग है मोदी जी की वो बढ़ती ही जा रही है. उनको पहले एंथनी एल्बनीसी ने कहा था लाइक अ बॉस. अमेरिका के लोग भी कह रहे हैं लाइक अ बॉस.
पद्मजा, थोड़ी देर के लिए आप ऐसा सोचिए, आप इतनी प्रसिद्ध भारत की इतनी प्रसिद्ध एंकर हैं, और थोड़ी देर के लिए सोचिए ऐसा हो कि लोग आपके घर के बाहर इकट्ठा हो जाएं और सुशांत सुशांत के नारे लगाएं और कहें लव यू सुशांत के नारे लगाएं, तो आपको कैसा लगेगा कि क्या ये आदमी है यार, ये क्या है, ये सुशांत सुशांत चिल्ला रहे हैं मेरे घर के बाहर खड़े होकर. ये आज की डेट में अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति के साथ हो रहा है. मेरे पीछे आप व्हाइट हाउस देखिए, अंदर जो बाइडेन मौजूद हैं, उनके अधिकारी मौजूद हैं, उनकी पत्नी मौजूद है, पूरा परिवार मौजूद है, और यहाँ जो बाइडेन के घर के बाहर लोग खड़े होकर मोदी मोदी के नारे लगा रहे हैं. अब आप सोचिए अंदर का क्या फील और भाव होगा, क्या तस्वीर होगी, जरा उसको आप देखिए. मैं आपको जरा लोगों के हाव भाव भी दिखाता हूं. नरेंद्र मोदी की पॉपुलैरिटी, नरेंद्र मोदी का रॉक स्टार वाला जलवा मैं आपको दिखाता हूं. देखिए छोटे बच्चे आए हुए. तो पद्मजा, आप देख रही हैं यहाँ छोटे बच्चे हों, बड़े बुजुर्ग हों, थोड़ा माइक दूर ले जाना पॉसिबल नहीं हो रहा है. वो बीच में एक बैरिकेडिंग है, नहीं तो मैं आपकी बहुत बात कराता. थोड़ी बातचीत कराने का प्रयास करता हूँ. ये बताइए, आज आप लोग नरेंद्र मोदी और जो बाइडेन में से किसको देखने आए? देखने दोनों को आए हैं। सुनिए मेरी बात, देखने दोनों को आए हैं। नारे खाली मोदी मोदी के लगा रहे हैं। बाइडेन भी बोलिए फिर। देखिए, हर कोई पद्मजा इंतजार कर रहा है कि नरेंद्र मोदी यहाँ आए और उनकी एक झलक पालें। तो मैं आपको तस्वीरें दिखाता हूँ जरा कि टाइम्स नाउ के दर्शकों को हम कैसे बिल्कुल व्हाइट हाउस के अंदर से ये तस्वीरें दिखा रहे हैं। और व्हाइट हाउस के बिल्कुल ठीक सामने मैं खड़ा हूं, बिल्कुल सामने। ये मेरे पीछे आप व्हाइट हाउस देख रहे हैं और यहाँ पर ये मंच लगा हुआ है जहां पर प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी और जो बाइडेन मौजूद होंगे। ये वो जगह जहां पर उनको सम्मान मिलेगा, वो लोगों से आकर मिलेंगे, मुलाकात करेंगे। एंट्री इसके पीछे से होगी और वहां से प्रधानमंत्री होते होते यहाँ पर पहुंचेंगे। और व्हाइट हाउस की खूबसूरती भी पद्मजा अगर आप देखेंगी, इतना शानदार व्हाइट हाउस अंदर, और मौसम भी इतना बढ़िया हो गया है। मैं आपको बताऊं, हल्की हल्की ठंड है यहाँ पर। सुबह बारिश हुई थी लेकिन उसके बाद हल्की हल्की ठंडी हवा चल रही है और लोगों का उत्साह जो है वो उस ठंडी हवा के माहौल में गर्मजोशी जो है वो भर रहा है। और प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का इंतजार जो है हो रहा है। अभी यहाँ पर सुबह के 8:45 बज रहे हैं, यानी अभी करीब 1 घंटा 15 मिनट का वक्त बचा है पद्मजा। और उसके बाद प्रधानमंत्री जब यहाँ आएंगे तब सोचिए क्या माहौल होगा। जब अभी मोदी मोदी की गूंज सुनाई दे रही है, जब प्रधानमंत्री यहाँ खुद होंगे तब क्या होगा, वो अपने आप में देखने वाली तस्वीर होगी। और अगर दर्शकों को देखना है तो उन्हें टाइम्स नाउ पर बने रहना चाहिए, मुझे लगता है।
Absolutely. Sushant, stay with me because let's go across to Malvika as well. You know, earlier you had Albanese comparing it to a Bruce Springsteen concert, and given the numbers of people, Malvika, and the music I hear behind you, it's almost that on the White House lawns. It's almost turned into a Bruce Springsteen concert.
Most certainly, it's a beautiful sight over here. The music is amazing. The crowds are cheering and waiting for Modi, like Sushant was reporting just now. The atmosphere here is very festive. It almost looks like a Bruce Springsteen concert, just like you mentioned.
And you know, Sushant, सबसे अचंभित करने वाली बात यह है कि ठीक है, जो लोग इंडिया में पैदा हुए फिर वो अमेरिका गए, वो मोदी जी को देखने आए हैं वहां पे, एक बात है। छोटे छोटे बच्चे जो वहां 7, 8, 9 साल के दिख रहे हैं, शायद पैदा भी नहीं हुए थे जब मोदी जी प्रधानमंत्री बने, वो भी वहां पहुंच करके मोदी मोदी के नारे लगा रहे हैं। ये बच्चे यहाँ पे क्यों इतने उत्साहित है?
देखिए जो लोग पद्मजा प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी को अभी नहीं पहले से जानते हैं या देख रहे हैं और पहले की पैदाइश है उनकी, देखिए वो कंपैरेटिवली देख पा रहे हैं कि उनको ये पता है कि भाई हम जिस इंडिया को छोड़कर आए थे और आज का इंडिया क्या है, हम यहाँ रहते थे तो हमको किस तरह का सम्मान मिलता था, 2014 के बाद से किस तरह का सम्मान मिल रहा, तो वो कंपैरिजन करते हैं। जो बच्चे आए हैं वो इस कंपैरिजन को घर में सुनते हैं, बातें करते हैं, और वो बच्चों को के ऊपर भी ये प्रभाव पड़ता है कि वो जब देखते हैं नरेंद्र मोदी एक नेता हैं जो जाते हैं और उनको रॉकस्टार जैसा जो रिस्पांस मिलता है, लोग मोदी मोदी करते हैं, नरेंद्र मोदी का जो कनेक्ट है, जिस तरह से वो मिलते हैं, नरेंद्र मोदी का जो कॉन्फिडेंस दिखता है, मुझे लगता है युवाओं को ये बहुत प्रभावित करता है। जैसे कल मैं कुछ युवाओं से मिला, पाठशाला के दर्शकों से मिला, उन लोगों ने कहा कि नरेंद्र मोदी तो पाकिस्तान को घर में घुस के 2 बार ठोका है। तो यूथ को ये पसंद आता है कि एक ऐसा डिसाइसिव नेता है, एक ऐसा निर्णायक नेता है जो बहुत गुरेज नहीं करता, परहेज नहीं करता कि हमें भारत का हित अगर आगे रखना है तो 10 चीजें सोचो, भारत का हित आगे है तो आगे है। तो ये जो निर्णायक भूमिका प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी निभाते हैं। दूसरा, जैसे हम राजाओं रानियों की कहानी सुना करते थे, तो वो भी अपने घर में नेताओं की कहानी तो सुनते ही होंगे कि बेटा ऐसा था हम जब आए थे। वो पूछते होंगे कि पापा आप यहाँ क्यों आ गए, वहाँ क्यों नहीं है, तो बताते होंगे कि बेटा ऐसा था वैसा था। फिर अब बताते होंगे नहीं बेटा देखो अब ऐसा है, और वो न्यूज में सुनते होंगे तो कहते होंगे पापा अब तो ऐसा है, आप तो कह रहे थे वैसा था, तो बताते होंगे कि 2014 के बाद हुआ है। तो ये यूथ इससे इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है, इससे प्रभावित हो रहा है। और जो पुराना वर्ग है, जो बुजुर्ग वर्ग है, जो थोड़ा और आप कह लीजिए वयस्क वर्ग है, वो इस तरह से प्रभावित हो रहा है।
और भले से ही जब आप 8 के हो या 80 के हो, जब आप क्लास में बैठे हो या आप ऑफिस में बैठे हो और एक अच्छा सा इंस्टाग्राम पे वीडियो आता है जहां मोदी जी और बाइडेन हाथ मिला रहे हैं और पीछे से एक बॉस वाला गाना बज रहा हो, किसको अच्छा नहीं लगता? Stay with me. I really must go across to Mr. Costello. He's been waiting very patiently. If you could just explain to us, sir, what is the criteria followed to accord the status of a state visit to an official visit by a bilateral partner?
Sure. So there are some slight distinctions. I would say typically people use terminology like state visit for a head of state, but that can also extend to a head of government. It doesn't necessarily have to be. Other people go by this characterization that an official visit is more just somebody who's a head of a government as opposed to a head of state. There's also countries that the head of government is also the head of state. So again, there are sort of these tiny distinctions to make between the two. I know for this particular visit we are referring to it as a state visit, and Prime Minister Modi being the head of government, and also, the head of state, but, not quite in the same way as, let's say, for example, we were talking about Great Britain and, there King Charles would be the head of state and the Prime Minister would be considered the head of government. But, then when you have two different people holding those two different capacities, then it gets a little bit confusing and complicated because do you afford one a state visit and one an official visit, or should it be both, or should it be neither? So sometimes these definitions and criteria get a little bit confusing. But typically with a state visit, it is reserving all of the pomp and circumstance and traditions and ceremonies for a head of state, and it is really the highest honor that a visiting leader can have when they come to the United States to meet with the president.
Now, here's a very interesting thing. We've spoken at length about the dinner that was hosted yesterday by the president for Mr. Modi. This is going to be followed by a state dinner. Most people think it's only about the menu, what we just think of state dinners as fancy meals, but there's a lot that goes on. Can you elaborate on that? Because one would not think that even a dinner would be this important when it comes to, a state visit like this.
Sure. And in that quote, what I was talking about was, I think from the outside, that's really what I think a lot of us and a lot of people see. They see sort of a fancy black tie event at the White House, and they hear about the dinner and the menu and musical performances. But a lot is going on behind the scenes, not just to prepare for it, which involves a lot of work from the State Department and obviously their counterparts in the visiting country, but also in terms of security, in terms of sharing, shared goals, objectives for the visit, and really sort of having an idea of sort of what topics they really want to discuss while they're meeting in person, because there is something to be said about communicating between intermediaries versus you're in the same room with, that leader or this leader and having a conversation, having a dialogue about the things that really matter to the United States, the things that really matter to India. And so I would imagine what we'll see coming out of this state dinner is, yes, we'll see the usual pomp and circumstance. We'll hear about the menu. We'll hear about the musical act, whoever it is. But, you do hope to come away with this event with really, I think both parties want to come away with something, some promises, some continued conversations. If you're talking about things in terms of economic relationships, trade, investment, or are you talking more about things in terms of national security, having more of an alliance in terms of regional politics? Not every state dinner is going to produce an immediate, a treaty, right? But it can be an inroad to starting that conversation that can lead to a more formalized agreement down the road that perhaps a Secretary of State will take off from the president and his counterpart in the visiting country will work through together. So it is important. These conversations do happen behind closed doors and in the Oval Office and in the cabinet room. So there is more to it than just having it be this event and this meal and the music. But there is some real politicking going on.
fascinating to figure out what goes on behind the scenes in a state dinner. There's clearly much more than food on the plate. I'll have to stop you for just a second there, Mr. Costello, because I have to take a quick break. Prime Minister is going to arrive anytime now in the South Lawns of the White House. We'll be back just in time, so don't go anywhere. Back in a minute.